Burnout, when it ends, a psychological analysis of the erosion of self, from Freudenberger's descent to the architecture of recovery. In the contemporary American landscape, burnout has transcended its status as a mere occupational hazard to become a cultural condition. It is the silent epidemic of the high achiever, a psychological state often worn as a badge of honor until it becomes a shroud. We live in an era of performative productivity, where the hustle is not just a means of survival, but a metric of self-worth. However, burnout is not simply being tired. It is a fundamental erosion of the self. It is the psychological and physiological aftermath of ignoring one's humanity for too long. This analysis explores the trajectory of this condition through Herbert Freudenberger's 12-stage model, examines the psychological mechanisms of the collapse when it ends, and provides a clinically grounded roadmap for recovery through reprioritization, rest, and delegation. Part 1. The physiology of the crash. Before understanding the stages, one must understand the substrate. Burnout is not just a mood, it is a bio-neurological event. When we are under stress, the hypothalamus-pituitary-adrenal axis activates, flooding the body with cortisol and adrenaline. In acute bursts, this is adaptive. In the chronic, always-on culture of the U.S., where 82% of employees are reported to be at risk of burnout as of 2025, this becomes toxic. The hijacked brain. Psychologically, chronic burnout shifts neural activity from the prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive function, planning, and emotional regulation, to the amygdala, the fear and survival center. This explains why burned-out individuals often feel foggy, indecisive, and emotionally volatile. They are operating on a survival loop. The brain begins to view work itself as a threat, triggering avoidance behaviors that the conscious mind tries to override with willpower. This internal war consumes the last dregs of energy. Part 2. The Descent. Freudenberger's 12 Stages of Burnout. Psychologist Herbert Freudenberger, who coined the term burnout in the 1970s, did not describe it as a sudden event, but as a slow, insidious slide. Understanding these stages is critical because prevention is possible in the early stages, while intervention is required in the later ones. Phase A. The High Achiever's Trap. Stages 1 through 3. The irony of burnout is that it rarely strikes the lazy. It targets the dedicated, the idealist, and the perfectionist. Stage 1. The compulsion to prove oneself. It begins with ambition. The individual feels a subtle but constant pressure to demonstrate their worth. In the U.S. corporate context, this often manifests as imposter syndrome, the fear that one is a fraud, driving an obsessive need to over-deliver to secure one's place. Stage 2. Working harder. To satisfy the compulsion, the individual accelerates. They are the first to arrive and the last to leave. They view an inability to keep up as a personal failing rather than a systemic issue. The psychological mechanism here is the denial of limitation. Stage 3. Neglecting needs. The first casualties are biological and social. Sleep, irregular eating, and social interactions are viewed as optional or distractions. The individual tells themselves, "I'll rest after this project," but there is always another project. The brain begins to categorize self-care as inefficient. Phase B. The Psychological Wall. Stages 4 through 6. As resources deplete, the psyche builds defenses to protect the ego from the reality of its condition. Stage 4. Displacement of conflicts. The individual realizes something is wrong, but cannot admit the source is their own behavior or the work environment. Instead, they displace this frustration. They might snap at a spouse, complain about incompetent colleagues, or obsess over minor logistical issues. The deep systemic fatigue is masked by irritability. Stage 5. Revision of values. This is a critical turning point. The individual's value system warps to accommodate the work. Friends, hobbies, and quiet time are dismissed as unimportant. The metric for a good day becomes entirely productivity-based. The psychological danger here is the loss of multidimensional identity. You become only what you produce. Stage 6. Denial of emerging problems. Peers begin to notice. They might say, "You look tired," or "You've changed." The burned-out individual reacts with cynicism or aggression, viewing concern as criticism. They develop an us versus them mentality, feeling that no one understands the pressure they are under. Phase C. The erosion of self. Stages 7 through 9. The internal defenses fail. The damage becomes visible. Stage 7. Withdrawal. Socializing requires energy the individual no longer possesses. They retreat into isolation. Alcohol or substance use may increase as a chemical means to force the brain to switch off or to numb the mounting anxiety. Stage 8. Odd behavioral changes. The brain, starved of dopamine and serotonin, becomes erratic. The individual becomes apathetic or hypersensitive. They may snap at innocent comments or burst into tears over spilled coffee. The emotional regulation system is offline. Stage 9. Depersonalization. This is a hallmark of severe burnout. The individual loses the sense of self. They feel like a machine or an observer of their own life. They no longer see others as people, but as burdens or obstacles. In healthcare or service industries, this manifests as a cold clinical detachment from patients or clients. It is a defense mechanism. If I don't care, it can't hurt me. Phase D. The collapse. The battery is not just empty, it is leaking acid. Stage 10. Inner emptiness. The anxiety may vanish, replaced by a hollow sensation. The individual feels useless, anxious, or dead inside. To fill this void, they may engage in binge eating, gambling, or excessive sexual activity, desperate attempts to feel something. Stage 11. Depression. Freudenberger notes that at this stage, burnout mimics clinical depression. Everything feels bleak. The future seems like a tunnel with no light. Motivation is gone. The body feels heavy, and the will to get out of bed is a daily battle. Stage 12. Burnout syndrome. Total collapse. This can be physical, heart palpitations, gastrointestinal collapse, stroke, or mental, breakdown, inability to function. This is when it ends. The body forces the rest that the mind refused to take. Part 3. Recovery, the psychological pivot. Recovery from stage 12 is not about a vacation. A week in the Bahamas does not cure a year of cortisol poisoning. Recovery requires a fundamental restructuring of the psyche's relationship with the world. 1. Reprioritizing, the value audit. The burned-out brain has learned to prioritize urgency over importance. Recovery requires reversing this. The psychological mechanism. This involves moving from an external locus of worth, "I am good because I produced X," to an internal locus of worth, "I am valuable regardless of my output." The strategy. The individual must conduct a ruthless audit of their values. Step 1. List what you spent your energy on in the last 6 months. Step 2. List what you actually care about: family, health, creativity. Step 3. Observe the gap. Reprioritizing means disappointing others to save yourself. It requires the courage to say, "I will not answer emails after 6 p.m., accepting the anxiety that comes with setting that boundary until the brain learns the world will not end. 2. Increasing rest, active versus passive recovery. The American concept of rest is often numbing, scrolling TikTok, watching Netflix. Psychologically, this is not rest, it is sensory input without output. The brain is still processing data. Passive rest is sleeping and napping. This is non-negotiable for physiological repair. Active rest is crucial for psychological repair. It involves activities that detach the brain from the stress loop. Creative rest, painting, writing, or cooking, using a different part of the brain. Sensory rest, silence, darkness, reducing the noise of modern life. Social rest, spending time with people who do not need anything from you. The shutting off protocol. The brain needs a signal that work is done. A shutdown ritual, example closing the laptop, changing clothes, a walk, helps bridge the gap between work mode, sympathetic nervous system, and rest mode, parasympathetic nervous system. 3. Delegating, overcoming the control paradox. Freudenberger's stage 2, working harder, is often driven by a psychological inability to delegate. The hero complex. Many high performers believe, if I don't do it, it won't be done right. This is a mask for anxiety. We hoard tasks because controlling the process reduces our anxiety about the outcome. The trust leap. Delegation is exposure therapy for control freaks. It requires trusting that good enough from someone else is better than perfect from a shattered version of yourself. Strategic incompetence. Recovery involves allowing yourself to be bad at things or allowing things to fail. When you stop catching every dropping ball, the system, workplace, or family is forced to adjust. This is painful but necessary for long-term health. Part 4.